In this video, I'm going to show you how to replace the fuel injector on this Dodge Ram 2500 with the 5.7 liter Hemi engine. There's 4 on each side of the air intake, so let's get started. With an 8mm socket or wrench or even a flathead screwdriver, you're going to want to loosen up these 2 clamps that hold the intake snorkel on. Just enough to get them to release. You don't have to remove them or anything. However, we are going to remove this. At this point, you should be able to just pull on it, get it off of the air filter housing, get it off of the resonator. There we go. And set it aside. Let's unplug the electrical connector for the intake air temperature sensor, set that aside, and then there's going to be a 10mm bolt right next to it. Remove that. It stays in here. You can't actually take it off. And another 10mm bolt near the oil filler. At this point, this whole piece should come right up and off. Set it aside. To release fuel pressure, I'm going to remove the cap off the Schrader valve and just put a rag there so it doesn't go all over the valve cover, and soak up any of the fuel that will come out as I release that pressure. There should not be a lot at all, which is why I'm going to do it this way. And at that point, there should not be any remaining fuel pressure in the rail, so that when we pop the injector off, it shouldn't spray everywhere. Okay, well, there we go. This truck has been sitting actually for quite a while now, so there is no fuel pressure left. Even better. With a pick or whatever else you have, pop the red tabs off of the fuel injector connector. That'll unlock the clip, and then squeeze it with your finger and pull it off. We're going to unplug all of the fuel injectors on this side. There's 4 of them. Oops, if that tab pops off like that for you, that's okay. You can easily put it back on. Just make sure you don't lose it. And all you have to do is slide it on. It has kind of like a little track that it slides in. There we go. 2 10mm bolts hold this rail on. Remove them both. If you have fuel out already and there's fuel fumes in the air, I recommend against electric power tools, even if they're brushless. You never know. Electric motors can sometimes make sparks, and well, you know what can happen. At this point, the fuel injectors should be ready to pop up and off. However, this looks like a fairly new intake. A lot of times they do get dirt built up around the bottom, the base of the fuel injectors. In that case, I would take some brake parts cleaner and compressed air, get all the junk out so that when you remove the fuel injectors and the rail, it doesn't drop down into the intake and into the cylinders. That way you don't get a bunch of dirt in there. Like I said, for me, they are pretty clean. However, I will still spray them with a little bit of brake parts cleaner because it will actually help remove the fuel injectors from the intake. It's, unlike what you might think, a great lubricant for these O-rings for fuel injectors. If you have carburetor cleaner, that works as well. You don't need a lot, just a little bit. Well, there you go. That's all it takes. And there's our rail with the 4 fuel injectors. There's a clip holding on the injector onto the fuel rail. I have a little pry bar. I'm going to stick it on the back side of this clip, try to pry it out. Try not to lose this clip. We're going to have to reuse it to lock the new one back in. So set that aside. And now, even though you release pressure, fuel will come out, so just be careful. I have this pad here that will absorb all the fuel. Wiggle the fuel injector, twist it, and it should come out of the rail. There we go. Fuel is about to come out. All right. There's your old fuel injector. Here's the new one. I have my finger over the fuel rail so it stops leaking. At this point, I'm going to quickly install this. The fact that there's fuel up there will actually help me slide the new one in, because the O-ring should just kind of slip up into place. Still has to be wiggled though. There we go. After a little bit of wiggle, it's slid all the way in. So to lock it, we now have to install this clip that has kind of like a folded lip on the bottom. This will go on the fuel injector like a fork, like this, and then the two cutouts on each side will go over this lip on the rail. That's how you lock the fuel injectors in. It can only go on one way, so just make sure you have it lined up, clip it on, and there you have it. If you spin the injector, the whole thing should spin with it, and if you try to pull it out, it should not come out. At this point, you're going to want to repeat the process to all the other injectors on this fuel rail. I always recommend replacing them all at once. Spray a little bit of brake parts cleaner on the O-rings at the bottom. This will help them slide in a little bit better. Like I said at the beginning, you don't need a lot for this. Just a little. Seat them, line them up, press them in. There you have it. If these two bolt holes line up, you know it's seated all the way. If you spray it with brake parts cleaner or carb cleaner, it should be very easy to install. I actually recommend against the use of silicone paste or any sort of grease, because a lot of times that not only gunks them up, but it makes them not as slippery as brake parts cleaner, believe it or not. Put the two bolts in and snug them up. Make sure they're evenly tight. Of course, we're going to come back and torque these. Torque these to 50 inch-pounds. If you don't have a torque wrench that goes that low, just make them nice and snug by hand. As you can see, 50 inch-pounds is not much. There we go. Let's plug in all the fuel injectors. Doesn't matter which one you start with. Just make sure they're all plugged in, and when you plug it in, make sure it clicks. I heard that click and then lock the connector down. Just go along the whole rail, plug in all four. There we go. That's all of them. At this point, you would do the exact same procedure on the other side and replace the other 4 injectors. Once again, I recommend doing them all at once. Let's install the resonator. Now you'll see that on the throttle body, there's this rubber gasket here, this rubber ring that adapts this and seals it up to the back of this resonator. So when you slide it on, make sure that this isn't folded or has fallen off like that, and make sure that this slides on all the way. Obviously, try not to pinch this wire here. There we go. It should seat here on the bottom. Make sure you don't pinch any wires here either. And you're going to want to make sure that these bolts line up and start in. This one started in, and this one is also started in. So let's tighten them up. Snug up this one and the other one. All right, just snug if you're doing this by hand, about 1/8 of a turn after they bottom out. Don't forget to plug in the electrical connector for the air temperature sensor. Make sure that clicks. Install the snorkel piece. Line it up with the resonator side first. I find that to be a little bit easier. Bottom it out and then push it over the air filter housing side. Bottom this out. Then with that 8mm socket or flathead screwdriver, whatever you use at the beginning, snug these clamps up. Once they're snug, you don't need to over tighten them. They just need to grab onto this rubber nice and snug. Basically, that's it. That's all that seals it up. If you end up over tightening these, you can strip them and then you'll need to install new clamps. If you can't move this around by hand and separate them, that's plenty tight. At this point, stick the key in the ignition, put it in the on position, and leave it there for a few seconds. That'll cycle the fuel pump, shut it off, turn it back on. I like to do this about 3 to 4 times. At that point, start the engine, and fuel pressure should be restored in the rail at this point, and the engine should start and run perfectly fine. Check your injectors for fuel leaks, and off you go. Take it for a road test.
When only the best will do, demand TRQ. The only company that lets you view before you do. TRQ is committed to offering the highest quality aftermarket auto parts that are engineered for peace of mind. Thanks for using and viewing with TRQ.